Welcome to Introduction to Tamper-Evident Devices. I'm Datagram, and you're probably going, who's this asshole? So I have a pretty solid background in tamper-evident technologies. I just gave a 2-day class earlier this week at Black Hat on this very subject. I also do a lot of non-destructive entry stuff, so think lockpicking, safe cracking, making friends with guards, and so on and so forth. I also do forensics, particularly forensic locksmithing, so determining if locks have been picked or bumped or opened with things other than a key. And like many of you, I also do computer security. And like many of you, it's also a bullshit term that I use, so we don't have to talk about it so much. I run a couple websites, such as LockWiki, Lockpicking Forensics, and eventually TamperWiki will have something more than a cool splash page that I got bored and made. I'm also the leader. Am I the leader? I'm the leader of a tamper team called the Motherfucking Professionals. And for the record, if anybody's wondering why we picked that name, it's because John used to ask me, like, can we do this? And I'm like, John, please, I'm a fucking professional. So that's that. We won the Tamper contest last year, which was the first ever tamper-evident contest ran by DT. And I'm proud to say that this year we've won all 4 levels. Yeah! All right. So, what the hell are tamper-evident? There's a cord here, and I'm not... Jesus. I thought this was a professional conference. Okay, so what's the difference? We have terms. We all work in security. We all have retarded things that we wonder, why do people say that? Why is that on every box I buy for security products? So these 3 terms, tamper-resistant, tamper-proof, and tamper-evident, as a fourth kind of pseudo-term is anti-tampering. So what do those mean? So a product that's tamper-resistant is actively made to deter tampering. Now what tampering is may vary depending on the product, but generally it's anything other than normal use. So for our water bottle, if we take off, thanks, I didn't realize I needed this prop, but thanks. The fuck? So the water bottle has this little seal. So if we take the seal off and put something in the water, that'd be tampering, as long as we put it back and it looks right. Something that's tamper-proof doesn't exist, but a lot of companies use the term to denote. Oh my God. To denote something that's cannot be tampered with, and that by definition means every definition that you can think of for tampering would be protected against. So it's the same like saying, this computer's hack-proof or whatever. So we all think that's retarded, and that's retarded. And then our last term is tamper-evident. So that's something that doesn't necessarily resist tampering, much like our water bottle, but it is determined to leave evidence of whatever methods of tampering that you did to the product. So tamper-evident itself, anything that leaves evidence. Usually, in a general sense, we say tampering is unauthorized access, alteration, or replacement. You can also use counterfeiting and so on and so forth. So why don't we just use locks, where we would use these tamper-evident products? Because locks actively prevent entry. That's their goal. Some locks are tamper-evident. They're meant to show that that the lock has been opened with something other than the key, but that's not always the case. So the main thing is it better to prevent an attack or detect an attack, right? So think about that. Think about a shipment of nuclear materials. Is it better to prevent someone messing with it, or better to detect when someone has messed with it? Because by attempting to prevent, we assume that we'll be able to detect all of these methods, by default, or that they would not happen. Tamper devices, by their very nature, that's the Jaeger kicking in, they enforce you to inspect them. Because again, they're not locks. They're not resistant to tampering or physical abuse. And locks are pretty expensive by comparison. These tamper seals are just little metal or plastic things that look a lot like locks. They're essentially one-way locks, but they cost a lot less. And think of also the cost of maintaining, key maintenance and key control and distributing keys and disposing of keys and all that kind of stuff. And then you also have to consider, environmental considerations. Will the lock function in this environment? Will it get jammed up? Will I have to replace the keys? Will I have to repin the lock? So on and so forth. So who uses tamper-evident devices? The answer is all of us. We just may not think of them as such. So food and drug packaging, again, our friend the water bottle. At Black Hat, I took the fire extinguisher from the room and I put it on stage and they got really mad about it. But those all have tamper seals on them. They inspect them or do whatever they do for the U.S. Fire Marshal. And then they reseal them to show, that it's been inspected and so on and so forth. A lot of drugs, pharmaceuticals, Tylenol, everything. That kind of stuff all have little tamper seals on them so that, when you buy the bottle, you open the box, you take off the shrink wrap, you open the bottle, all that kind of stuff. All are, little tamper indicating devices, so we can tell if our pills have been screwed with. Pretty much everything, warranty protection, all of our DVD players and electronics like that usually have a little tamper sticker to determine when we've opened the case. The Customs, Border Patrol use these a lot to secure cargo shipments and other kind of stuff. And then also think about confidentiality. So how do you determine, if I send a letter to you, how do you know I sent it or it wasn't modified en route? It's easy with like digital stuff, easier, but it's a lot harder with physical things, right? Because, we have to inspect them, and then how far are you willing to go to inspect them to ensure that that's the real deal? We also use them a lot for international stuff and government level, three-letter agency level kind of stuff. So, for example, nuclear safeguards. When we transport or I actually don't know what we do with nuclear materials, but whatever we do with them, we seal them. All these little containers that have the plutonium or whatever. And we also use these heavily for treaty enforcement between countries. So agencies like the IAEA and the United Nations, they'll say, hey, country A, we're not going to make bombs, and country B agrees. So how do you enforce, this idea of two countries agreeing to something when, you can't just have representatives of each government, watching everything they do? So think in terms of like Pakistan and India and North Korea, China. All these nuclear arms treaties we have to say, okay, we're not going to make bombs. How do we enforce that? A lot of that comes back to tamper seals. We seal them and then determine if they've been tampered with, when the inspectors come, however routinely it is. So we're going to go over a little history, and then we're going to talk about two basic types of seals. So this will just give you a brief overview of all the kind of stuff they use in modern day. So the original idea was that we used a lot of clay or mud, and we'd dry it over something. So think of a box. We're going to cover it in clay and then put this pattern. So for you to gain access to the box, you have to figure out how to remove that clay and then put it back when you're done. So that may or may not be difficult, especially when it's 1800 or 800 BC. You don't know what the fuck you're doing. This is another example from long ago. And so we would, let's say we have our box again. We tie rope around it, right? So this is called a belay, and it's a little piece of clay that fits over the rope, and then you stamp it in and it squishes into the rope and dries. So again, like our box covered in clay, you'd have to remove that to access the rope to open the box. The Pope is awesome, and he has a ring, which he's kind of baller in that sense, right? He has a ring. So there's a guy, there's two guys. One guy, when the new Pope, when the old Pope exits, he has to melt his ring, right? When the new guy comes in, some other guy makes him a new ring, and then they use that for stamping papal insignia. And so you can see here's a real old version. But tradition still continues to this day. And usually they do wax nowadays. In mid-1800s, we started combining locks with seals. And it's pretty cool because, again, we think, why not use locks? Why use seals? Why not use both? Have the best of both worlds. So this is an example of a real old padlock. And you can see on the right here, there's this little piece that kind of swings open, and that allows you access to the keyway. So they figured, well, why don't we just put the stamp over that and then close that up? And then to get access to the keyway, you'd have to remove the stamp, right? Now, we'll ignore any, well, what if you don't need to use the keyway to open the lock? There's also a lot of locks from this time period that have little glass plates. So when you lock it, a little glass plate slides over the keyway, and you'd have to shatter that to get access to it. During World War I, World War II, we started doing mail censorship, and probably before that. So essentially what it is you send some piece of mail. Somewhere along the way, the censor says, okay, flag that. And so they cut it open, right? Then they read what it is, they determine if it's okay to go through. They tape it back up, and then they put a stamp over it. And you can see over in the top left here, they even write what language the letter was in. And then again, we also use this kind of similar stamping stuff to make sure that our mail has gone through the mail system properly. A very cool story is beginnings of the Cold War, beginnings of the CIA. They had a lot of difficulty with communicating back and forth. The CIA had a lot of difficulty communicating with agents in Moscow. So what they did was they did this elaborate program where they bought thousands of different postcards, and they sent them to and from different addresses, different recipients, and they'd put different things on them, like in Moscow, from Russia with love, so on and so forth. And then when they reached their destination, the CIA would go back and look at them, determine which ones had been tampered with by the Russians, and then determine which methods they used to try and detect tampering, and then which postcards didn't qualify for whatever censorship or tampering that the Russians did. So through all this, they look at the pattern and say, well, if we send it to Ohio and it's in this rural area, maybe it doesn't get flagged, and so on and so forth. So it's a very, very cool project, and I think a lot of it's in Family Jewels, if you want to look that up to read more about it. I don't remember the name of the project, but it's also documented a lot in the book Spycraft. I just think it's a really cool thing that, 70 years ago we were thinking, well, how do we detect mail tampering, and how can we prevent it? How can we get around people doing it? Because obviously you can't tamper everything that goes through the mail system. It's just not logistically possible. So you got to pick and choose. In the 1980s in Chicago, there was a lot of scares where Tylenol pills were replaced with cyanide pills. And so you can see on the left is Tylenol, on the right is cyanide Tylenol. So people started dying from this. And there was this huge scare where Tylenol was rushed off the shelves. And Johnson & Johnson, owner of Tylenol, said, we can't detect tampering at the factory level, so it must be further down the chain. And to this day, it hasn't been determined how this happened. There were a lot of copycat kind of things, like a woman fed her husband a cyanide Tylenol and then went to her local store and put a dozen cyanide boxes mixed up in there so that other people would die and they'd think it's just another freak occurrence, all the boxes have been tampered with kind of thing. Obviously it didn't kill Tylenol, but similar incidents killed a number of other aspirin or pain medication type companies. So now we get to more modern day seals. After the whole fiasco in Chicago, we instituted the Federal Anti-Tampering Act. And so all pharmaceuticals now have to have these different layers of protection. So think of it just like computer security, where we have defense in depth. We don't just have a firewall or a what the hell do we use in computer security these days? We don't have IDS or all that kind of crap. So now you have to open the box, and inside the box you take your little shrink wrap off. You attempt to take the child-proof container off, and then despair, usually. And then there's this little wax adhesive combination seal that's over the actual pills themselves. On a lot of electronics, we use these little warranty stickers, right? So this is the first generation of this particular Xbox tamper seal. And it's just this little silver seal that says Microsoft. If you try and pull it up, it leaves a little residue that says void or opened or whatever it is. And so there started to be videos of people taking these off on YouTube. And Microsoft, I believe their official response is that, well, that's cool, and we're always looking to make our product better, so they instituted a new seal. And now there's videos of this being removed with a hairdryer on YouTube. It's essentially a sticker. So I think you're all comfortable removing stickers at one point or another. We use these a lot. One thing I found out recently was that the duty-free bags at airports, you could actually take different kinds of chemicals on board planes as long as they're sealed in the duty-free bag. Now, depending on where, yeah, right? Holy shit. And it's funny for me because it's not legal for me to fly because I have all these dangerous chemicals that I use for the tamper stuff. And I can't be like, hey, can I bring this gallon of acetone